Yes, yes. And the backstory to that is that my aunt had sent me a link and said, "Hey, check this out." And us being Puerto Rican, singing and dancing is very much a part of our DNA. We love music, like J-Lo, Ricky Martin. We're all Puerto Ricans. So she said, you'll appreciate this. And I had watched it before I went to Africa and India. And when I woke up from the coma, I couldn't move anything at all. I had tubes down my throat, tubes down my nose, and I thought that I had a lead sheet over me because I couldn't move anything. And that was pretty scary to be awake and unable to move your limbs after being fully functional 2 weeks before. And my body had atrophied. The muscles were hanging off my limbs and I had no strength. So every day the nurses would come in and do a bit of physio and move me around a little bit and leave. But once I got all the tubes out and they moved me out of ICU and onto the ward at Massachusetts General, they would chase off my son every night and shoo them off and close the ward, and patients need rest. So I'd ask my son to put in my headphones, put on my laptop, and I'd watch the documentary Homecoming, which is significant because Beyoncé chronicles her journey from having twins in a cesarean and 180 days later being the first woman of color to perform at Coachella and put the show on. And I've had a cesarean, so I know what that means, and it's not fun. But she did it, and like the work she put in, and then the whole concert, her songs of empowerment. So no one knew it, but every night I would lie in that bed and I would will my arms and legs to move and sing every note of that whole show in my head, willing my body to get better. And I was in a foreign country. All of my friends were in Australia. My family would leave at night and I'd be by myself. And so I would do this every single night, watch the video again and again and again, and will my limbs to move. And, her songs about empowerment were things that I needed to hear. And there's a particular part of one of her songs called Sorry, and she sings, "Now I'm going to be my own best friend." And that stuck with me. And my whole mission and vision had been about other people. But here I was lying in that bed having to save one person, me, and love myself enough to pull myself through this and reach deep inside. And I will never forget when the nurse came through the door, because my right side was significantly more damaged than my left. So my left was more active and things, but my right was weak and weaker and more damaged. But when the nurse came in and said, "Hey, Steph, how you doing?" one morning, about day 44, I was able to put my hand above my head and wave at her. And for me, I had won the lottery in my head because I knew that if I kept at it, that I could be recovered to the best I was going to be. But that state was not going to hold me. And that was my kind of my tripwire, if you would, to a new form of thinking. And hence my book, Thank You, Mrs. Carter, is a true tribute to my virtual coach, who probably has no idea that she, was my motivator at that point. And it was just the right person at the right time with the right message that I needed. And I just kept drinking that Kool-Aid every single day. I probably watched that documentary 400 times. Netflix will tell the truth if I ask for my analytics, but I just, it was my mantra really through recovery was, I can do this. And having this example in front of me to set a goal against and a benchmark was, so significant. And that very early stage where I had to make a choice. Am I going to be this victim? Am I going to stay in this mindset? Or am I going to pick myself up and be the best version of me I can be, despite the injuries and despite the setback? I didn't know it was going to be 2 years. I didn't know it would take 38 operations to fix me, to getting upstanding and being able to stand up paddleboard and travel alone for the first time, get on a plane, pull my own luggage, do these things that I used to do without thinking, Jen. But here I am, and, it's a miracle. Yes, the first trip I made was with my son to the States for Christmas and New Year. And we had a few equipment failures because I have these screw-on prosthetics. And we'd been to the snow. We were in New York, for Christmas Eve, and it was, very cold and there was snow on the ground. Then we went to Belize and it was tropical and in the sea and stuff. So, extreme temperatures and metal corrodes and things like that. But I wound up having two loose screws. and I had screws loose, but not as it sounds. But these were inside the poles that attached to my leg. They came loose, and I didn't know that this was normal, and it was incredibly distressing. But getting the tools and having to kind of MacGyver my situation with some tools from a hardware store was very confronting. But having done it once, now I have a toolkit and I just travel with it. And when I go through metal detectors, I have to, declare I'm carrying. I will not be without my toolkit anywhere now because I know that it can happen at any time. But, it was pretty harrowing to I had my son with me the first time I traveled, so I didn't do it alone. But, this last trip to South Africa, flying alone and going through airports and doing these things by myself was a little bit scary, but I was better prepared. So if I did have an equipment failure, I knew what to do. It'd be okay. Yeah, yeah, no, Fiona is exceptional. She's an incredible human being, Fiona O'Donnell. And she's my lead investor. I have other investors who are smaller around the table, but I think I've been very fortunate that they've all been very understanding. Everyone's excited for my recovery and want to see us, deliver on our mission and how we go about it. We were about to raise our seed round in 2019. We built some great software and we were ready to, go big or go home. And then this random thing happened, and then of course travel changed. So it was almost divine time, as I call it, the universe working with you, not against you. That we when we had this slowdown because of my injury, the world slowed down at the same time. And now that it's all picking back up, it's a perfect storm, if you would, for us to come back into that market. And certainly where the seeds we planted in Africa and India in 2019 have matured in those markets, that we can now come back into that. So I'm quite excited about the future for WanderSafe. Hmm. It was no one's fault. I mean, we couldn't have stopped the pandemic and we couldn't stop a mosquito. So just, art imitating life, if you would. Go to see your GP, your general practitioner, and ask them, and in most countries, especially Western countries, have a database of what kind of vaccinations are recommended and required. Travel insurance is paramount. If you can't afford travel insurance, you can't afford to travel. I've had two times in my life where I've had major medical emergencies that were in the, you know, five digits. And I'm sure that my injury with malaria while I was at Massachusetts General in ICU in the coma and the days subsequently and flying me back cost my insurer $1 million easily. And who would have thought that what would take me down would be an invisible parasite that would become such a nuisance. But seeing your doctor, looking at your situation for what is required for that region or country is essential. Don't have a cavalier attitude. Download the WanderSafe app and have it set up so that in case come across something or you're feeling uncomfortable, you've got a plan B and know what to do, because that's always an ounce of prevention, pound of cure. And certainly, do your homework with your State Department or Department of Foreign Affairs in your country, because there's a lot of information online that we tend to not pay attention to, like safety ratings, what to be aware of. And it's all free and accessible. You just have to Google or go to those sites and say, hey, tell me what is the plan, or what should I be concerned about for India, or for Nigeria, or for Kenya, or for South Africa, or for New Mexico, or wherever, Venezuela. So depending on where you go, there's always travel advisories, and they're kept current by the government. That's the quickest and easiest way to get information. But we don't tend to go there. We tend to go to our friends who've never been and say, what do you think? Which is, the poor choice, because unless you've experienced those things or you're reading up on it, you don't know how to pack effectively. So I would recommend do your homework. Know before you go.